Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Rocket Summer, an inaugural BookTube event created by Michael K. Vaughan. Takes advantage of our association of the hot days of summer with reading science fiction to read science fiction from its earliest days of Jules Verne and H.G. Wells all the way to the doorstep of the modern era of science fiction to the year 1970. Rocket Summer has been a blast, no pun intended, for me. I have loved it. Absolutely. I knew I was going to love it, but I thought I was going to love it in a different way than I ended up doing. I thought I was going to be rooting around in the basement, in the cellars of science fiction, looking at authors like A. Bertram Chandler that I don't know all that well, reading all the 35-cent paperbacks that I bought for the occasion. I didn't end up mostly doing that. For Rocket Summer, instead, I ended up mostly reading largely better-known canonical works, and usually having a ball. Not always, but usually having a ball, finding all sorts of dimensions, and also reminding myself how long it had been since I read a book. You read a book, you fix it in your mind, and you young people won't realize this, but the years go by, and sometimes you need a cold splash of water in the face to realize, oh my God, it's been an entire lifetime since I read that book. Now, a lot of you compound that by not remembering literally anything at all about a book that's more than, let's say, 10 years old. I don't know how you do that, but you somehow manage to forget everything about a book that you read 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 30 years ago. I don't know how you do that. I don't quite do that, but I often forget or don't see nuances that I read the first time. The goal here, of course, in all cases, is that you're growing as a reader. Always growing as a reader. Which means it makes sense that rereading an older book would divulge deeper levels. Things you didn't notice the first time. Also connections with the author's work, not all of which you would have read the first time. Whatever the factor involved is, I have loved that aspect of Rocket Summer. Just loved it. And now Rocket Summer is coming to an end. Today is the last day. We launch off into August tomorrow with a whole new BookTube event. A great BookTube event, not in its inaugural year. Garb August, Criminali's Garb August, where Criminali makes us all read trash for the month of August. And like everybody else, I'm looking forward to Garb August. I cannot wait to dive in to great mucky cesspools of garbage for the whole of the month. But before we wrap up Garb August, before we wrap up Rocket Summer, I thought I would talk about one last book. Because the last week of Rocket Summer is the 1960s. And in 1965, Frank Herbert published Dune, which is not only the best science fiction novel of the 1960s, but I would argue the best science fiction novel of all time. Certainly the best science fiction novel of the long stretch of time that we are covering with Rocket Summer. So from War of the Worlds to 1970. I've been doing a read-along of this. I am not done with that read-along. Several of you have been complaining that I have stalled. I'm not stalled. I will be coming back to this read-along. But I've been doing a read-along of this book, which when you do a read-along, at least when I do a read-along, when I want to talk a lot about it instead of just summarizing, I really bear down on the book. And that's been a lot of fun. I don't know how many times I've read Dune, and it's always fun to go back. I always find things that I didn't find the last time. And so I've been bearing down on this. Of course, those of you who haven't read Dune, if you're participating in or ardently watching Rocket Summer and you have not read Dune, read it. Absolutely read it. Put aside all the rest of your TBR for now and read it. I've done several read-alongs on the book. Feel free to call up all of those videos and use them for any kind of help that you need. But it is great. It is a great book. During my read-along of this, which has largely coincided with Rocket Summer, I have found all sorts of nuances and details, wording, pacing choices that I didn't see in all those earlier rereads, which is great. I'm sure that I'll be returning to this book for the rest of my life. But this is, of course, the story of a feudal warfare in the far future, where two family houses, switch planets of control, and the outgoing house, Harkonnen, means to destroy the incoming house to their old planet Dune, House Atreides. destroy the Duke, who is the head of that household, destroy his woman, the Lady Jessica, destroy his son, Paul Atreides, destroy all of his war masters, scatter the house to the four winds, as an example of how terrible the Harkonnens can be to their enemies. And Dune, the planet, is the source of the spice melange, which not only prolongs life, but is incredibly addictive and enhances a whole bunch of other human physical and metaphysical abilities, including increasing the precognitive abilities of people who already have them to see the future, which the Spacing Guild uses in order to make space travel possible. Because if you're going to travel faster than the speed of light, if you're going to fold space and almost instantaneously go from one area to another area light years away, the one thing you have to know for sure is whether or not you're going to materialize at the other end inside a planet, or inside a star, or inside a meteor shower, and meet with instant death. And the only way to know that that is clear in this book is not astrogation, but rather precognition. The guild uses its melange-enhanced abilities of precognition to make space travel possible. So this substance is the heart and soul. It's the mortar that keeps the whole of this intergalactic imperium together. And the Harkonnens control it on Dune, but Paul Atreides is now, when his family is destroyed, he is loose on Dune. Thought dead by the Baron Harkonnen, thought dead by the rest of the Imperium, and free to make alliances with the native people of Dune, the Fremen, who, in addition to having dreams about what their desert planet can become, are also the galaxy's most ferocious warriors. And this is a future in which your hand-to-hand combat abilities mean a lot. The only reason that House Atreides was able to be so successfully and decidedly routed by House Harkonnen, for instance, is because House Harkonnen was aided by the warriors that are employed by the Emperor himself, the Sardaukar. In the course of the early parts of this book, it becomes obvious that the Fremen are a match for the Sardaukar, more than a match for them, and that if someone could control them and shape them as a weapon, that someone would be unbeatable. Especially if that someone was on Dune and was willing to destroy the spice. That is the ultimate crowbar over the head of everyone, including the Emperor. All of civilization would come to an end. Everyone has stockpiles of spice, but those stockpiles aren't infinite. And so the last part of this book, which we will be getting to in my read-along, is incredibly rousing. But incredibly rousing, I should say, as an adventure story. The scope, the ear for action, the incredible descriptions of the action at the end of Dune have a parallel. They have a parallel in the third Barsoom book by Edgar Rice Burroughs, which is also absolutely superb along exactly the same lines. I won't stress that too much because I don't want to be branded a heretic. I yield in my admiration of the Barsoom stories only to Michael K. Vaughan. Otherwise, I love them more than anybody in the world. And I maintain that the last 70 pages of the third John Carter from Mars novel are very similar in the expertise of their execution to the last 70 pages of this book. But although that is very satisfying, that rousing action ending is very satisfying, I think readers of this book would agree there's a whole lot more of that going on. There are layers upon layers upon layers upon layers in this book. They're virtually endless. Otherwise, I couldn't be rereading it with so much satisfaction so long after I first read it. Layers upon layers upon layers in this book. All of them intelligently woven and interwoven and explored. All the different personalities and perspectives of the different characters. The long, shaped history of all of the institutions involved here that we never get hit over the head with exposition. Instead, it's woven into the book so expertly that by the time you finish with Dune, you feel like you have been a citizen of this Imperium. It's incredible. It's an incredible job. And when I was looking back on Rocket Summer, this first Rocket Summer, and when I was, of course, looking back on this book, because I'm doing a read-along of it, I started to ask myself a seemingly dumb question. They're often the best ones. Why isn't that true of more science fiction novels, especially in the 60s? But why isn't that true of more of them? All through Rocket Summer, I have been rereading canonical works of science fiction, and for every one or two that seem greater to me in my rereading, like The Left Hand of Darkness, like Stranger in a Strange Land, or Canticle for Leibowitz, which I don't think I made a video about, but I did reread it for Rocket Summer. For every one or two of those, there are canonical works of science fiction that don't ignite like this. It doesn't happen. And I always wonder about that. I wonder why that is, practically, but also rhetorically. Like, for instance, I know that Michael K. Vaughan, for instance, the creator of this video, of this event, his favorite science fiction novel of all time is City by Clifford Seamack. But why isn't City better? Why is it so obviously a cobbled together fix-up novel? Why is it that? Frank Herbert didn't write Dune as one initial intact soup to nuts manuscript. He serialized it. He realized different parts of it at different times. But then he sat down in a very hot room and wrote the whole thing from beginning to end. Rewrote it with meticulous care and a huge amount of invention. A huge amount of chucking things in, chucking things out. He made it into a book. He didn't just make it into a book, he made it into a masterpiece. Well, Frank Herbert was a mighty, mighty smart guy, but he wasn't any smarter than Clifford Seamack. Why isn't City Dune? Why isn't Slan Dune? By A. Van Vogt. A. Van Vogt smarter than Seamack and Herbert. Why isn't Slan a masterpiece? Why isn't it greater than it is? I know that City and Slan are both viewed as masterpieces, and so a bunch of other books that I mentioned. The Drowned World by J.G. Ballard is often considered a masterpiece. What's another one that I read? The Invasion of the Body Snatchers. I reread this month. People love those books. I love those books. But nobody says about those books that they are anything like this, that they have the heft and the sheer narrative brilliance of this book. And they could. The story at the heart of Slan could be this great. It could easily be. But the ideas aren't worked over. Their nuances aren't fleshed out or chased down by the author. Same thing with City. Most of it is ripped from the pages of Astounding magazine, unchanged from just gimmicky science fiction. A lot of it isn't, but a lot of it is. And all of it is uneven. Same thing with Invasion of the Body Snatchers or A Case of Conscience or all kinds of books that aren't quite, that it doesn't happen. Even I, Robot. I mean, in a lot of ways, in fact, especially I, Robot. Especially since I don't feel quite so guilty beating up on Isaac Asimov, because unlike Clifford Seamack or A.E. Van Vogt or James Blish or whoever, Asimov can take it. He can take it. He can take being beaten up on. He's Asimov. So what can I do to him? Nothing at all. What can any critic do to him? Nothing at all. But, okay, let's concentrate on him so I don't get feathers ruffled with concentrating on City or on Slan. City and Slan came to mind the most for the subject that I'm trying to get at here, however ineptly, as books that don't become this kind of masterpiece right at the same time, and that could have, and that should have. Dune by Frank Herbert in 1965 should not stand out so prominently. It shouldn't. I know perfectly well the market pressures on all of these writers. Frank Herbert wrote novels on one side of Dune and on the other side of Dune that aren't good at all. Science fiction novels that were obviously dashed off and that had the potential, the same potential that I'm talking about, but they weren't made into this. He could have, but he didn't. A. Van Vogt and Clifford Seamack could have made their books into this, and they didn't. And there's no use really out of loyalty saying, well, no, they didn't make it into Dune, they made it into its own thing. They made it into a lesser thing. They're lesser books. And so are a lot of other of the books that I reread during the month of July. And I was wondering, if I use my example, I, Robot, I'm wondering why that is. Asimov always had 2 manuscripts in his desk. He wasn't always pressed. by deadlines or money pressures to get books out the door. He could have made iRobot into more than what it was. He could have made it into the book it wants to be. And he didn't. I wonder about it. I wonder about why this is my rousing conclusion to Rocket Summer 2024. Why is that? Why don't I have 20 of these to pick from? I don't get that. And I'm curious about it. I'd love to hear what you think on the subject. Of course, a lot of you probably don't agree with the premise, so you're probably howling in outrage. But those of you who agree with what I'm saying, that this and a handful of other books, a tiny handful of other books, really do stand alone in a sea of 35-cent paperback pulps. You could say that's the state of literature just in general, in the genres or not. Okay. But why doesn't it happen more often? Why is it that when I look around for a book from H.G. Wells to 1970 to wrap up Rocket Summer, the one I naturally think of is this? Anyway, these are just closing thoughts. I'm going to continue with Dune, but I have reread Dune in the month of July, so I figured it counted to say goodbye to Rocket Summer as we put aside vintage science fiction and move on to garbage, which there's considerable overlap between those two things, but I don't know how much science fiction I'm going to read in August. But I had a great time with Rocket Summer. I had a great time with all the emails that all of you were sending me about the stuff you were reading, about the stuff I was reading. I thought it was a blast. I loved watching the videos that I saw, and I cannot thank Michael K. Vaughan enough for letting me be a co-host, even though I was such a bad one. So we're going to move on to Garb August, where I will disappoint another event creator, because I'm also a co-host for Garb August, and God knows how I'm going to mess that up. But I'm going to wrap this up for now. I loved Rocket Summer. It was wonderful. It also, this could be the subject for another video, but it also really underscores the value of rereading, which I didn't really need that underscored myself. I love rereading, but even I was amazed by the value of it in July. But I had a great time. I didn't follow the schedule, but I had a great time. So I'm hoping for Rocket Summer next year, when I will, I presume, not be a host, but I will definitely watch from the sidelines. But in the meantime, we're going to put away the Bug-Eyed Monsters. And we're going to move on to the Russian secret agent nymphomaniacs. I'm ready. It's a long, hot summer indeed. So I'll wrap this up, and I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.